everyone. Welcome to the Trail Talk Highpointing podcast. I'm your host, Lauren, and the Highpointer we're speaking with today is John Mitchler, calling from Illinois. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lauren.
So can you tell the listeners a little bit about how you got into the outdoors and what got you highpointing?
Well, how I got into the outdoors, I've always been outdoors because I grew up in rural Illinois a long time ago, and we spent most of our time outdoors. We lived along the river, Fox River, and we spent all of our time playing along the river or being outdoors, doing outdoor chores. There really wasn't anything to do indoors. So I understood heat, humidity, and cold, and bugs, and everything that's outdoors, and it just felt comfortable to me to be outdoors. Being in Illinois, there wasn't a lot of hiking and backpacking and camping, although we tried. But that I picked all up when I moved to Colorado.
Where in Illinois did you grow up? What city?
Just west of Chicago, along the Fox River in Oswego.
Okay.
South of Aurora.
Yes, of course, I know where that is.
Now it's being converted. It's being converted to subdivisions now, but it still has a lot of its rural characteristics.
You're right. Have you ever camped at any of the Illinois state parks?
Yeah, Starved Rock State Park, and some of them way down south in the Shawnee Hills. So, do a little camping, but normally it involves rain and not the spectacular solitude that you can find elsewhere in the United States. But it is getting outdoors. I spent so much time outdoors in where I grew up that to go camping seemed kind of redundant.
Yeah, right. Well, I grew up around Starved Rock State Park.
Oh, really? Good. You know it then.
In Lockport. Mm-hmm. I do. I was close to the Inum Canal.
I'm in the process of hiking that end to end.
Oh, nice. That's like a developed trail, right? Like, I think when I left, it was like a bike trail.
Yeah, it's a well-developed trail. It goes from Lamont to LaSalle, right through the heart of Illinois. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it goes through downtown Lockport, which is a really cute little historic town.
Yes. At 97 miles, you could probably do it in a couple overnights, but we're doing it in chunks to really enjoy the local vibe when we go. There are quite a few hiking trails in Illinois and a lot of rail to trail. So there are a lot of opportunities to do that. You don't get the solitude that you get in the mountain ranges of the United States. And
You're right. Yeah.
And the spectacular scenery. Although, as you know, with Starved Rock, there is spectacular scenery in Illinois.
Yeah, that's a real gem. And then also there's, I like the Mississippi Palisades in that Apple Canyon region in Northwest Illinois.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were just there. Yeah.
And then the Shawnee National Forest is really beautiful as well. Oh, have you been to the Garden of the Gods, the Illinois Garden of the Gods?
Yes, Illinois. Out in Colorado, I live close to the Colorado Garden of the Gods, but yeah, I've been down there. I mean, there's so much to see down in extreme southern Illinois, down at the tip of Illinois in the Shawnee Hills. Supposedly America's only east-west mountain range, but there's all these great canyons and waterfalls and hiking trails. There are so many, even in northern Illinois, that I'm working with my friend Ron, helping him out. He's writing a guidebook to the waterfalls and canyons and caves of northern Illinois. And it's turning into this massive project. There's so many canyons, waterfalls, and caves in northern Illinois.
I didn't know that, and I grew up there. I do know there's a state park called Rock and Cave State Park, or Cave and Rock.
Cave and Rock?
Cave and Rock.
That's down on the Ohio River. cave in the
That's
woods.
right. Yeah. Well, that's the only cave I've been to in Illinois. That's really cool. How did you get into high pointing? Did you start in Illinois at Charles Mound?
No, I went on a geology field trip to Western Illinois, Wyoming, where we did our 6-week camp. And I saw so many things in the Black Hills and out there that I thought, well, that'd be cool to go back to. So in 82, I took a trip to the Black Hills and hiked up Harney Peak for my first state high point. And and then very soon after that, still in college, I found at a local outdoor store a copy of Frank Ashley's guidebook, which is a little pamphlet, but it described all the state high points in very rudimentary form, but it was really cool. And I bought that for 50 cents, and I thought, this is really cool. It's a cool concept. I never thought, coming from Illinois, that I would ever do the big, bad mountains out west, because I didn't have the skill. I didn't have the KSE knowledge, skill, and equipment. I didn't have the equipment for it, or experience on these mountains. That all developed later. But wherever I could, whenever I took a vacation early on, I went to state high points.
And what did you study in college?
Geology. I was a geologist, and out of college, did coal exploration, oil and gas exploration, and then later on moved into environmental work, managing environmental projects.
Would you say your geology background has maybe fueled your interest in high points?
I think it's all the same. It's all like who I am. Geology was a natural degree to get. High pointing was a natural pursuit to take. Being outdoors was natural to me. So it wasn't like I sat down and read about it and learned about it and went out and did it. It just came naturally to me.
Yeah.
Although it did take gaining experience and knowledge to pursue it completely. So I'm always impressed with people that start out not really knowing too much about geography and geology, and they really get into it and they pursue it.
Yeah. So did you head further west at first, or did you go out east to really get into your high pointing list?
I went out east. Went out east to New England and the East Coast, and that seemed to be where the vacations for somebody from Illinois end up being, certainly back in the day. And it was only until I moved out west that I started first doing some 14ers and doing hikes like that and climbs like that, and learning that high altitude and that mountains weren't scary. They just had their own set of rules, and that you can learn those really quick. Be on the top at noon, know when there's thunderstorms, take the proper equipment, much more so than in Illinois. So I learned about that, and then eventually started doing the more difficult ones.
So what was your favorite out east?
The favorite out east? It's a list. So I'm checking off a list. So every time I do one, I check it off, and it's my favorite of the day. It's my latest favorite. When I think back on peaks that I've done, and I think of them as my favorite, it's probably because of the person I was with, or the event the reason I was there, maybe the dinner I had that night. That's what made it favorite to me. Because as a peak, they're all the same. They're like all high points, and they check off my list. For example, Virginia, it's a beautiful hike, beautiful scenery, wild ponies, forest. it would probably be my favorite, but we had to rush through it. So we had to rush through the trail and get back to the car so that I could attend my first Highpointers convention. So it didn't end up being my favorite. Now I have to go back because I went and I took my photo next to the boulder with the benchmark in it.
Yeah.
But there's a boulder a little bit away that's slightly higher, so I have to go back and touch that just to make sure that I touch the highest boulder in the forest.
Oh, there is. Okay, so I'm going there next month. I'll keep that in mind.
I will send you a copy of the article that I had Don Holmes write up for the newsletter, describing where that is.
Oh, that's good to know. Sometimes I ask, what's your favorite high point in a region? Or sometimes I'll ask, what's the most memorable? And it really is the same thing. It's not like, this peak impressed me. It's more like the experience that I had on this particular peak for this particular reason was very special, and I'll always remember it. Most often people say Mount Rogers. But, just you're a perfect example. The experience was not the same because you had to rush through it. Maybe you weren't as present for that hike as you were some other hikes.
Right. And it has to do with the people you're with, making special memories with friends and people that you've just met or people that you know, and you think back and you remember that. It's sort of like listening to a song. If somebody asks you, what's your favorite song? Well, it depends on what mood I'm in, or it depends on if your favorite song may not be mine because it brings back memories. So it's very similar. Those are very similar in nature.
You're right. Let's head out west then. What are some memorable high points out west?
Big mountains, thinner air, not as much memory left after doing them. Mount Elbert was fun to do. I did it with somebody who had never climbed a big mountain before, so I had to coach and help her on the way up. I'm not sure it was a very pleasant experience for her because she'd never done a big hike with elevation gain. In the end, it worked out great, and in that way, we're happy. I'm happy with that experience. Most of the big mountains out west, I recruited people from the Highpointers Club to go with me on them because I don't want to do them solo. And in most cases, I'd never met the people. I never really understood I didn't know who they were. So it was really cool to meet these people. And we went from there and did quite a few additional peaks after those state high points.
That is really cool, especially considering that this, I'm assuming, was before Facebook. So you didn't just write a post on a Facebook group saying, hey, who's doing this peak at this time? Meet me at the trailhead.
In the Highpointers newsletter, we had what was known as the climbing collaborators.
Okay.
Because everything had to begin with a K because that was just the way Jack Longacre, that's the way his typewriter worked. He didn't have a C, so he had to substitute K with everything.
Wait, is that really the reason?
Collaborators with a K.
That's really the reason?
Yeah.
There's no...
Yeah, his typewriter... Yeah.
I thought it was...
Whenever you see the K thing in club stuff,
I thought there was a different story behind that wasn't, had nothing to do with the typewriter technicality, but that makes it better.
Yeah, so in the mid-'90s, even the late 90s, there really wasn't, people didn't really even communicate much by email, or it was very slow and it was kind of a big deal. So we wrote letters to each other and communicated at conventions and met up with people. On all the big peaks out west, I went with my brother Kurt. He went along with me. So,
okay.
Those were all memorable in that way.
And I would imagine in the mid or late 90s when you're doing these bigger peaks that there maybe wasn't like a lottery, for example, for Mount Whitney.
No.
No.
Yeah, it was pretty wide open. It was pretty wide open access. Even in the 14ers in Colorado are starting to get quotas on them, and we're seeing there's just so many people that want to pursue either high pointing or just climbing in general, hiking in general. That there's permits and quotas and things like that. No problem getting permits and getting access. The only problems that we had in the beginning, or I had, was the equipment. Because like an ice axe, what's an ice axe? Crampons. What are crampons? How do you use them? I learned a lot of that through the courses at the Colorado Mountain Club.
Oh,
I
nice.
lived near Denver.
Okay.
And could learn about that and practice on those. The first really technical climb we did was Mount Hood, and Kurt, Dawn, and I hiked up Mount Hood, and we roped up, and we put on our crampons correctly, but our rope lengths were way too short to be really safe. We didn't know that. We didn't know.
Sure.
We kind of didn't know what we did, and we went right up the pearly gates and no problem, came back down. But then I realized it later that some of the things that you try out when you're first attempting some peaks that you've got to learn and improve on in the future. And I assume many people are like that, especially if they don't understand roped snow travel. That's why in Colorado I have so many people come out, and I take them up to some of the snow fields, and we rope them up for the first time and let them cross easy slopes for
That's
the
good.
first time to see what it's like. Yeah.
Well, that's when mountaineering really turns into a team sport, when you're attached to other people.
Yes. Even when you're not roped up, when we climbed up like Whitney, because of the weather and because it was an overnight hike, it was a team sport. We had to watch each other and take care of each other and encourage each other. So a team sport can be more, it doesn't necessarily have to involve rope, but
Oh, no, you got to be a team player all the time.
Mostly.
But when you start tying those ropes on each other, it just gets real. So
Yes.
when you set out to do all the 50 state high points, did you know that you were eventually going to have to climb Denali? And did you know what that really meant?
No, because I'm graduating in my skills and experience. Yet Denali is something up there that nobody really wants necessarily to talk about. Maybe they could buy some books about it or listen to people talking about it. And I remember sitting, having a drink on the back porch with George Vandersloot and talking about it. And he asked me, "Are you going to go?" And I go, I don't know. I don't know if I can do it." And he said, "Of course you can do it. You've done all these other peaks. It just requires a little bit more preparation and a little bit more understanding of what you're getting yourself into, because it's a much more serious mountain. One of the more serious mountains actually in the world. That's commonly climbed. So I eventually ended up learning that and convincing myself that I could do it. And in 2003, I climbed Denali and finished my quest for 50 state high points. I didn't plan on that. I thought I'd finish in Maryland, but I didn't get to the summit in 2001 when I first climbed Denali. We waited 8 days at 14 camp for a storm, and it basically burned up all our food and fuel. So we had enough food and fuel for one run at the summit, And we got up there and it was just blowing and howling, and we couldn't wait it out any longer. So we had to come down. So I went to Maryland the next year, or actually it was that year, and got my 49th, and I thought I would never return. I never really planned on it. It's such a, well, now it's really expensive if you use a guide. But it's just such a major undertaking with time and commitment, getting in shape, that I never thought that I would go back. But I was practicing for another peak, Mount Bona in Alaska, and I was on that team to go, and I thought to myself, why am I going to Bono? Shouldn't I go try Denali another time? If I'm going to spend 2 weeks on a mountain, I might as well spend it on the one that got away. So that's how I went back to Denali.
Did you do it with other members of the Highpointers Club through the Connection newsletter that you referenced earlier?
No, I used a guide service.
Okay.
Alaska Mountain School with Kobe Coombs. It just so happened that there was somebody in 2001 that was a Highpointer, Edward Earl, and
okay.
So that was interesting. The chances of you taking a guide service, the chances are you might have some Highpointers, whether they're club members or they're just people pursuing this 50 state Highpoints, will be on your team.
Now this was in 2001, you said, probably before YouTube, maybe in the very early days. And I'm just thinking about how people do research now of different routes and preparation techniques and what to expect, and they're watching other people's GoPro footage. How did you prepare in that way? Not physically, we'll get into that later, but how did you do research? Obviously you read books, but which ones?
Well, that's a good point. There wasn't YouTube and online. There wasn't as much online that you could access. There was a little bit, but no, that's right. There wasn't too much online. I remember that was just about the time when they were getting, you could have communicate. There were sat phones. You didn't really have communication with during the hike, real time communications. Mm-hmm. Now, when you climb Kilimanjaro, you can do hourly updates using your phone. Now there's so much communication, but back then there wasn't. So in a way that was good, because then I had to dig deeper to find out really what was required of me. Now, using a guide service, they take care of the food and this and that, so I could focus mostly on conditioning and skills. But there's only certain basic number of skills that you need: snowshoeing, crampons, ice axe, rope travel, and knowing your knots. All the knots, a lot of the knots that we learned in Colorado Mountain Club, in Alaska, they have some different ones that we'd have to relearn, because different parts of the country, different parts of the world have different knots that they prefer to use. So that kind of caught me off guard. But once you're a knot tire, you learn them and figure them out, and you know what you're doing in short order. Now, even if I'm going to go out and I know how to change my mower blades. But let's say I wanted to change my mower blades. You just get on YouTube and look up the make and model, and there's a how-to for anything. I mean, even the simplest stuff. I'm sure there's a YouTube on how to take light bulbs out of their socket and put them back in.
Oh, there's YouTube videos, multiple, for how to put on crampons.
Yeah, how to put on crampons, but it's. The best advice is to actually test it. Find somebody in a place like up in New Hampshire or Colorado, some of the mountain areas, and just come out. And you don't even have to do it in winter. You can do it in spring when there's nice warm air temperatures and plenty of snow fields, and just go out and for a weekend just practice doing it and figuring it out there.
Now, how long did the guide service take you out on Denali for? Because I think now it's standard 21 days. What was it when you did it?
Yeah, it was they told you to plan for 2.5 weeks. So I would always get a plane reservation way far out in advance, because I've had experience on bigger peaks, bigger expeditions, Denali, where people said, I can't go on any further. And you ask them why. Well, my plane leaves in 2 days. I have to go down. Well, that should never be the reason that you go down and you don't make the summit. You should always either, I'm a big fan of doing one-way tickets. And then when you know you're down, you can plan out when you can get your one-way ticket back. I mean, sometimes you have to tell your boss at work that when you're going to come back, but they usually understand if it's a big expedition like this, or they should.
I agree. Now, we know the first time you went up, you had to turn it back at 14,000 feet because of a storm that came through. How was the second round? Obviously, it was successful, but can you give some more detail?
The second time you go back to Denali, it is much easier. And the reason I say that is because it's so familiar. Everything you're doing is you've already done before. It would be like going back and redoing a tougher mountain like Granite Peak or even Harney Peak. When you first do Harney, I call it Harney Peak.
And Black Elk,
Peak in South Dakota. When you do that the first time, you see the mileages and you look at the trail system and you don't know, what you're going to face and the elevation gain. If you do it a second time, you recognize the trail, you understand what you're in for, you're very familiar with it. So it was much easier that way.
Okay.
We did have our challenge. I guess they call it adversity nowadays. When we left 14 camp, we knew it was kind of sketchy weather, stormy weather. We made it up the head wall to 16,000 feet, and from there you just push up to 17,000 feet.
Yeah.
And we got up on the west buttress, and it was blowing 30 miles an hour, snowing. We made it a few hundred feet, and the lead guide said, "Nope, we're turning back." And the thought of us going all the way down to 14 and redoing that the next day or two was really disheartening.
Yeah.
So what he did was we stayed in the caves at 16,000 feet, rarely used. We sat there. The clients sat there while the guides probed around in the snow and found the entrances to the caves, dug them out, and we went down into the caves and slept in our sleeping bags in the caves at 16,000 feet. Really gross, because people have been using these snow caves, which are now like rock hard with ice. They've been using these snow caves for many, many years. So there was a lot of food and detritus left by other human beings in there. It wasn't a very pleasant, but at least you got out of the wind, and it was a lot warmer than being outside. So, yeah, we had to go through that. We went up.
Did you get any sleep?
Not really, not a lot, not too much. It was more in those situations. I'm not looking for shut eye, like sleep, deep sleep, dreaming or whatever.
Right.
I just want my body to rest. I want my arm muscles to rest. I want my legs to rest. I want my eyes to rest and just lay there. And maybe I'll fall asleep, but the main thing is just to rest and let your body rest, so that when you get up in a few hours, your body is energized. Next day we went up to 17,000 feet,
Oh,
and
right.
we waited there for a day, and then we made the summit. And on the summit, it was 10 degrees with a 10-mile-an-hour wind. So I never even put on my heavy jacket. I
Wow.
never put on my fleece jacket. It was
Wow.
you have a number of layers of as you go higher, you just put on heavier long underwear, so you're getting layers. And then I just wore a wool. Wore a wool shirt, wool mittens, wool gloves. I'm a big fan of wool, so I felt entirely warm enough. So nice to be on the summit of a big mountain like that with goggles on and wind blowing. It makes you look like a real mountaineer, but nah, I just had my beanie hat, and I could even take my sunglasses off and get a photo. No, it was a good feeling. It wasn't it wasn't as difficult as some of the peaks I've climbed after that. So it wasn't as much elation of reaching the summit as I thought I'd have. It was really cool because then I knew that I was a 50 completer
Yeah.
as opposed to a 49 completer. That made me feel good. I believe I was number 125, but that made me feel good. But it wasn't. It was sure, it's technical, but it's not rock climbing or sketchy exposure, things like that. It's relatively straightforward hiking up, maybe with heavy loads, but it was kind of a straightforward hike, actually.
So, what were the mountains that you climbed that were more difficult than Denali?
Some of them were in the pursuit of national parks. That the highest point of the national parks,
Which will be part
which I
2
can
in
talk
our
about later.
series. Yeah.
Yeah. Some of those are not friendly. They're rocky and pose much more of a challenge. As far as state high points, Rainier, to me, with 2 5,000-foot days of just trudging through snow, was more of an effort, a continual effort, and it wasn't as much fun for me to do that. You're going through all the motions of climbing Denali, but it's not the big one, and it was a lot of effort. So it didn't have that much. It didn't have that much. I didn't give it that much credit.
I felt very special after I climbed Rainier because it was my first time on a glacier, and I'd never seen a crevasse in my life. I had never seen like an ice bridge or anything. So like going over the ladder and stuff, I really felt like a mountaineer. But on the top,
See?
once we
Yeah.
got to the summit, I was like, I'm tired. I saved this Snickers bar that I was like, I'm going to eat this on the summit. It was frozen. The wrapper was sticking in the chocolate. And I'm like, let's get down so I can eat my Snickers bar. But, the elation wasn't there, even though when I booked the trip to Seattle and then to Rainier, that was all that consumed my mind from that time until I went there. And then when I got to the summit, I was just like looking at my watch, like, all right, let's get back down. I'm thirsty.
Yeah. Yeah. One cool thing I did on the summit of Denali is I had a empty water bottle that I brought along, and I stuffed it as hard as I could with snow, and screwed on the lid, brought it down with me, brought it to Talkeetna, packed it away, brought it back to Colorado. Of course, by then the snow had melted and was water, but I poured it into ice cubes in the ice cube tray and made ice cubes with Denali summit snow. So
That
we were at a party, and
that is so cool.
you'd have to pack it in your suitcase, your check
Yeah.
luggage. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, how unique. You know what? I am
Yeah.
kind of a hoarder when it comes to sentimental stuff, so I would probably, if that were me, those would still be ice cubes in my freezer. I would never use them.
Yeah, right. Or keep some of that water on a shelf in a little vial or something. Yeah.
Right, right. Oh, that's so cool. So I have to ask, would you ever do Denali again?
Um, um, yes, I would, because I know that the second time I did it, I knew what I was doing. I know that it's not that bad
Okay.
as far as day to day, although it is a routine. It's kind of a brutal routine, and getting into shape and the cost of it, or putting together the time you'd put together a expedition group requires. So some of those reasons I wouldn't do it. And then the weather, it's nobody knows what the weather's going to be like this year in 2024. Last year, I think the success rate was 35%, just because it was bad weather. I mean, the
Well,
route's the same, the snow's the same. It's just the weather pins people down. And so when you ask, would I go back? Yes, if you could give me good weather, absolutely, I'd go back. But otherwise, no. There's so much. There's so many other things to do. I haven't really pursued repeating very many things, very many mountains, or
well,
visiting returning to very many spots.
well, that's a good segue into your county highpointing. So, did your county high points start after you had completed the 50 state high points, or were they going on at the same time?
I think I started county high pointing in the mid '90s, so I was well on my way to finishing the state high points, and it wasn't really a thing until Andy Martin published his guide to county high points by state, but half the states weren't even figured out. So it was his guidebook at the beginning was not all the states, and some of us were doing it, and we'd communicate about it, and I remember there was a time in like '96 or '97 where we realized that Colorado had never been completed. Back then it had 63 counties. Now it has 64, but nobody had been to all 63. So I remember we got up to this crazy idea. Well, we should complete them. So that we just got up, left the girls, and jumped in the car, Dave and I, and drove out and did one that had never been done before. That was so crazy. And then after that, I really started pursuing in Colorado, so that by '99 I had completed all the 63 counties in Colorado, and was first to do so, or at least first to get credit of
Wow.
claiming to do them all.
And you co-wrote a book?
And yes, Dave and I wrote a guide to the 63 counties, and then our second edition had 64 counties.
I'd love to put a link to that where listeners can get that book in the show notes.
We normally sold a lot of them. We did a lot of slideshows for various organizations, but then we also sold it on Amazon.
Yeah.
You can have a link to it. Just searching on my name.
Awesome.
Will
Wow.
come up. Since then, there's quite a few states have actual guidebooks to their county high points. Utah, California, New York. I mean, it's interesting to see that there's actual guidebooks to county high points.
Yeah. I'm going to have to look for mine. I live in North Carolina right now. And the other day I was thinking about, I was like, maybe I should do the county high points because I've been to all the state parks and I usually hit the highest peak in whatever state park I'm in. I'm like, I could very well have done quite a few of these county high points. But then I started thinking, in some of these really remote areas, what if the high point is on someone's property and people here are a little weird about if you step on their property? I don't want to get into trouble, you know? But if there's a book about it and if there's a guide, I'd be interested.
Yeah. Well, in order for Colorado, a dozen of the counties are in ranches, and we had to. Our publisher insisted on us confirming with the landowner what is their rules for visiting their land. Some of them didn't care. Some of them said just leave me a phone message, and others asked for permission because even in this day and age, there is cattle rustling, and they see a vehicle out on their property, they call the sheriff. They assume it's cattle rustling or taking things off the property. So we made sure that we had that all figured out and nailed down before we wrote the book. And now, if you go to the website on Peak Bagger for the county high points in North Carolina, the trip reports will pretty much tell you for those private county high points what you should do and should not do.
That's right. Okay. So when I went to Peak Bagger, I only looked at the list. I didn't go really into detail about each high point, but maybe I should do that to find out what the protocol is for those particular high points. Now you did, so you're doing some of the California county high points, and you did one with a former podcast guest, Mihai. He's our favorite American Romanian high pointer. Can you talk to us about that particular high point?
You know, we've only briefly communicated before, and I think that's the La Viaga Peak in California is the only peak that he and I have hiked together, even though we seem to have a lot in common and we communicate off and on. That is a very restricted private peak. They're really getting serious about that peak. Trespassers, they have motion cameras, and they use drones to track down people that are crossing their ranch. So Kobe got permission from the ranch to take a group of people up that, and there must have been 30 people, and Dave and Dennis put the logistics together, so a group of us actually could climb that peak together. And I remember on the summit, Mihai bringing out his Romanian flag.
That's his
which
thing.
He always unfurls on a summit for that summit shot. Yeah,
that's fun.
And there's a few geologists, quite a few geologists among the group.
I bet.
Not as many as the mathematicians in the group. For some reason,
Really?
I don't know why high pointing attracts mathematicians and marathoners.
Well, that I get.
I understand the attraction of being outdoors and running, but you'd think runners want to do Granite Peak. Would runners want to do Ohio's high point? So I don't know why, but there's a lot of marathoners and a lot of mathematicians in the group.
I think I might know why, because I'm also a runner, and whenever I visit a new place or whenever there's a place that I want to go to, I think, is there a marathon there? Maybe I can run that marathon and I'll get to see that place. When I lived, my first job out of college was in Mexico, and that was how I saw the country, as I would run marathons in the different cities throughout Mexico. And it's just such a great way to see the cities. So I would not be surprised that marathoners take that mentality to other pursuits. For example, if they're in a certain region or a certain state, they go, what's the highest place? And the mathematician, I think anyone in the statistics, analytics, maybe math realm, I think that they like lists. And I don't know that for a fact. That is simply a theory. But highpointing in whatever capacity, whether it's state, county, city, park, that's a list.
Yeah, you could be right. I didn't think it through like that, but I just made the observation.
Well, I notice, from talking to a lot of high pointers now, I don't know, I'm getting close to episode 60 here. You get, in high pointing, you get some of the rogue adventurers, but not as much. You get the people, whenever I say, like, how'd you get into high pointing? They will say, well, I always loved maps and I always loved lists. And eventually that just came together and I discovered high pointing. But people often say that. And then there are people who kind of stumbled into it. They were doing a trail. They see a geo survey marker and they're like, hey, what if I did all 50? But those are really the two main parties that I talk to, in this little podcasting thing that I do. But I think we're adventurers, but I think there's a little part of our brain that kind of lights up when you mention a list or a map or, I don't know. There's a little bit of nerd in all of us, I'm going to say.
The list things, definitely the list thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and in part 2 of our series, we're going to talk about your other list, which is National Park high points and National Monument high points. So this is part 1, cool. Your state county high points. And John, thanks for talking to us about this. And you're a really great resource, I think, for a lot of high pointers that want to do exactly what you've done one day and reach all 50. So
yes,
thanks for sharing all of that.
I have a lot of experience with it. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Lauren.
Of course. And we'll be back next week with the National Park High Points.